We sit inside heated houses, wrapped in blankets, and still complain about the cold. Yet the people before us were comfortable in even harsher conditions. This is how medieval people slept in tepees without freezing to death. Have you ever noticed how soft we've become? The heater is on, the socks are fuzzy, 2 blankets are piled up, and we're still shivering. Now, rewind about 600 years. A Native American elder is sleeping in a teepee on the open prairie. The wind is howling, snow is piling up outside. There are no walls, no electricity, no thermostat, no electric blanket. Just fire and knowledge. And in the morning, he wakes up like it's any other day. That wasn't luck, that was design. Those winters were not rare disasters. They came every year, brutal and unforgiving. Families didn't just survive them, they slept through them in shelters that to modern eyes look about as sturdy as a grocery bag. So how did they do it? How did people with no modern technology turn deadly winters into something manageable? The answer is simple and humbling. They built a system, and every part of it mattered. Imagine a native family traveling across the plains as winter approaches. They're dragging poles and hides, snow clouds are rolling in, but before they even think about setting up the teepee, they make the most important decision of the night: location. Pick the wrong spot and the cold will win before sunrise. The first rule was clear: never camp in the open. Open ground meant full wind exposure, and wind is what kills you in winter. Cold air alone is uncomfortable. Moving cold air strips heat from the body fast, so families searched for natural protection. A tree line could act like a massive wall, blocking the worst gusts. Even a small rise in temperature inside the shelter could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. Rock faces and cliffs were even better. Stone absorbs sunlight during the day and releases its heat slowly at night. Setting a teepee near rocks was like borrowing heat from the land itself. Valleys could work too, but only if chosen carefully. Some valleys sheltered from the wind. Others trapped cold air like water in a bowl. Sleep in the wrong low spot and you'd be colder than anywhere else. This knowledge wasn't written down. It was learned early and remembered forever. Fuel mattered just as much as shelter. Firewood was not optional. It was survival currency. Camps were always set up near deadfalls, so no one had to wander too far during a storm. Running out of wood in the middle of the night wasn't uncomfortable. It was deadly. Location wasn't about comfort, it was about life and death. Once the site was chosen, the teepee itself did the next part of the work. Its shape was no accident. The cone design shed the wind instead of catching it. Gusts slid around it rather than slamming into flat walls. Snow piled up around the base, adding another layer of insulation, like nature sealing the shelter for the night. Inside, a small fire burned at the center. To modern people, this sounds insane. A fire inside a fabric shelter feels like a disaster waiting to happen. But the fire was never large. It sat in a shallow pit, carefully controlled. Heat rose gently instead of blasting upward. At the top of the teepee were smoke flaps. These were adjustable vents, not decoration. Families angled them depending on wind direction. Cold air entered low, fed the fire, then warm air and smoke rose and exited through the top. This created steady airflow that warmed the space without filling it with smoke. It was natural heating and ventilation combined. Someone always tended the fire. Adults took turns waking through the night. Too much flame meant smoke and overheating. Too little meant freezing. The fire tender was the human thermostat. This wasn't a set and forget system. It required attention and experience. But the air was only half the battle. The ground was the real enemy. Frozen earth pulls heat from the body faster than cold air ever could. Lying directly on it is like sleeping on ice. Native families never did that. They turned the floor into a survival system. First came woven mats made from willow or reeds. These trapped air, and trapped air is insulation. On top of that went thick layers of dry grass, packed enough to stop ground frost but still breathable. Then came animal hides. Buffalo or deer hides were laid fur side up to trap body heat, leather side down to block drafts. In some camps, families packed the soil itself. Loose dirt was scraped away and compressed until it became dense. Dense ground absorbs daytime warmth and releases it slowly at night. When the cold became extreme, heated stones were wrapped in hides and tucked under bedding. These stones released warmth for hours, like ancient heating pads. Sleeping arrangements mattered just as much. Nobody slept alone. Families slept close together, sharing body heat. Elders and children were placed in the center where warmth was most stable. Adults formed a protective ring around them. This wasn't just emotional closeness, it was strategy. The more bodies packed together, the less heat escaped. Think of penguins in Antarctica. Same principle. Humans just figured it out first. Clothing followed strict rules. Layers were everything. Soft, processed hides against the skin managed moisture. Thick fur layers trapped heat. Outer hides blocked drafts. Extremities were protected first because they freeze fastest. Feet, hands, ears, and faces were wrapped and tucked. Grass was sometimes stuffed into moccasins for extra insulation. Hands went into armpits. Knees were pulled close. One rule guided everything: do not sweat. Sweat in winter is deadly. Wet clothing drains heat fast. People warmed up before bed, then slowed down. Enough movement to raise the body heat, but not enough to soak their layers. Balance meant survival. When cold became brutal, families turned to something most of us would never consider: animal fat. Buffalo or deer fat was rubbed onto the skin to block wind and repel moisture. It trapped a thin layer of warm air against the body. Sometimes the fat was mixed with ash. The dark ash absorbed heat and helped prevent frostbite. This mixture was applied to faces, wrists, ankles, and necks. It wasn't decoration. It was armor. Children and elders were always protected first. Extra layers, extra hides, extra attention. Heated stones placed near their feet or backs. Adults checked on them throughout the night, even if it meant losing sleep. Family itself became the safety net. Warmth wasn't just fire and hides, it was care. Winter brought other dangers too. Predators moved closer during storms. Wolves and bears were real threats. Camps were arranged defensively. Dogs acted as early warning systems. Not pets, but guardians. Weapons were kept within arm's reach. Snow was piled to guide animals into predictable paths and block wind. The teepee became more than a shelter. It became a fortress. The most important secret, though, was mindset. Native people didn't see winter as an enemy. It was a season to respect. They adapted instead of fighting it. They read the land, the wind, the animals, and the sky. Knowledge replaced technology. If a site became unsafe, they moved. If storms worsened, they adjusted. Morning would come. The storm would pass. Inside the teepee, the family would still be there, warm enough, alive. That's the lesson. Survival wasn't about strong walls or modern tools. It was about understanding heat, wind, moisture, and people. Teepees weren't weak shelters. They were intelligent systems built on generations of wisdom. And the real secret was never the teepee itself. It was the knowledge inside it.